The Painter's Muse. Chapter 1. The Encounter. Julian Winters had always been the type of artist who lived and breathed his craft. His world revolved around the canvas, paintbrushes, and the way light could transform a face or a landscape into something transcendent. For years he had searched for that elusive spark of inspiration that would take his work to new heights, but nothing seemed to fully ignite his passion. That is, until he met her. Isabelle Rousseau wasn't looking to become someone's muse. A literature student in Paris, she had come to the city of art and romance to explore her own passions. She spent her days buried in books, wandering through the narrow cobblestone streets and losing herself in the world of stories and poetry. She never imagined that she would stumble into an artist's life and change it forever. It happened on a warm afternoon in the heart of Montmartre, where artists filled the square, painting portraits for tourists. Julian was among them, his usual stoic focus on display as he worked on yet another commission. Isabelle passed by, her long, flowing dress catching the light in a way that seemed almost ethereal. She paused to watch him, captivated by the way his hands moved so effortlessly across the canvas. Julian felt her gaze before he even saw her, and when he looked up, his breath caught in his throat. Her face was timeless, her features delicate yet strong. She had an air of mystery about her, as if she belonged to a different era. Without thinking, Julian called out to her, asking if she would allow him to paint her portrait. Isabelle hesitated for a moment, but there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability, a plea for inspiration, that made her agree. And so began their journey together. Chapter 2. The Sessions. Isabelle returned to Julian's studio the next day, her curiosity piqued. She had never posed for a painting before, and the idea both thrilled and unnerved her. Julian's studio was everything she had imagined an artist's space to be. Large windows that let in the golden light of late afternoon, walls covered in sketches and unfinished paintings, and the unmistakable scent of turpentine and oil paint in the air. As Julian prepared his materials, Isabelle settled into the chair he had placed in the center of the room. She felt exposed under his intense gaze, but there was also a strange sense of comfort in the way he looked at her, not as a woman, but as an artist looking at his subject. She realized that he wasn't just seeing her, he was studying every curve, every shadow, every nuance of her expression. The first few sessions were quiet. Julian would work in focused silence, occasionally giving Isabelle gentle instructions on how to tilt her head or where to rest her hands. Isabelle, in turn, would sit still, her mind wandering as she tried to understand the man behind the easel. There was a tension between them, an unspoken connection that neither of them fully understood. As the days passed, the silence between them began to fill with conversation. They talked about art, literature, their hopes and dreams. Isabelle learned that Julian had once been a rising star in the Paris art scene, but after a series of failed exhibitions and personal losses, he had retreated into his own world, afraid to risk his heart again. Julian, in turn, discovered that Isabelle was not just a beautiful face, but a woman with a brilliant mind and a soul full of passion. Each session became more than just a painting. It became a dance of emotions, an exploration of the growing bond between them. Julian found himself painting with a renewed fervor, as if each brushstroke brought him closer to understanding both his art and his feelings for Isabelle. And Isabelle, who had always viewed herself as an observer of the world, began to see herself through Julian's eyes. A muse, yes, but also something more. Chapter 3. The Realization. One evening, after a particularly long session, Julian stood back to look at the nearly finished portrait. Isabelle had fallen asleep in the chair, the soft light of the setting sun casting a warm glow on her face. Julian's heart swelled with a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: love. He had tried to keep his emotions in check, to remind himself that Isabelle was just a subject, a muse for his art. But as he looked at her peaceful expression, he knew that it was more than that. She had become his inspiration, his anchor, and the reason he had found his way back to the passion he thought he had lost. Isabel stirred, waking to find Julian watching her. She smiled sleepily, and he couldn't help but smile back. In that moment, something shifted between them. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of everything they had shared over the past weeks. Julian stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. "I think it's finished," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Isabel looked at the painting, her breath catching in her throat. It was beautiful, more than she could have ever imagined. But it wasn't just the painting, it was the way Julian looked at her, as if she were the most important thing in the world. Her heart raced as she realized that she felt the same way about him. Without thinking, Isabel stood and closed the distance between them. Julian's hand reached for hers, and in that moment, they both knew that their connection was no longer just about art. It was about something much deeper. Chapter 4. The Confession. The next day, Julian invited Isabel back to the studio, but this time it wasn't for another painting session. When she arrived, she found the studio transformed. Candles flickered in the dim light, and soft music played in the background. Julian stood in the center of the room, holding a small canvas covered with a cloth. Isabel's heart skipped a beat as she approached him. She could feel the intensity of his emotions, the weight of what he was about to reveal. "I've been working on something," Julian said, his voice trembling with nervousness. It's not just a painting, it's a part of me, and I want you to have it." He removed the cloth, revealing a smaller portrait of Isabel, but this one was different. It wasn't the carefully posed, elegant image he had been working on for weeks. This portrait was raw, full of emotion, her hair tousled, her expression vulnerable, yet strong. It was a reflection of everything they had shared, of the love that had grown between them. Isabel's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the painting. She turned to Julian, her voice barely a whisper.
"It's beautiful,"
she said.
"I don't deserve this."
Julian reached out, cupping her face in his hands. "You deserve everything, Isabel. You've given me back my passion, my heart, and I don't want to lose you." Isabel felt her walls crumble as she let herself fall into his arms. Their lips met in a soft, tender kiss, a promise of everything that was yet to come. In that moment, they both knew that their love story was just beginning. Epilogue. The exhibition. Months later, Julian's work was showcased in a solo exhibition at one of Paris's most prestigious galleries. The centerpiece of the exhibition was the portrait of Isabel, the painting that had captured her essence and ignited their love. The gallery was filled with admirers, but Julian's eyes were only on one person, Isabel, standing beside him, her hand intertwined with his. Their journey had been unexpected, a beautiful collision of art and love, and as they stood together, surrounded by the beauty they had created, they knew that they would continue to inspire one another for the rest of their lives. Their love was not just a muse's inspiration, it was a masterpiece in itself.